Hello friends and welcome to an itemization video. As you can see, it's the Aeon Disk this time. I think I understand where this item fits. It's in a niche. That's my opinion of it, and that's what I'm going to explain to you guys in this video. I think that makes it a little easier because if you understand that niche, you know when to buy this item, which is not all that often, to be honest. That's why it's later on in the series, and also just because I'm getting to it now. So let's start by breaking down the item. 3,100 gold, a bit on the expensive side. The build-up, not that great either. The energy booster, you could use it for arcane boots, sure, but the other stuff, you know, kind of expensive. Doesn't really give you anything until you complete the item. I mean, I know it gives you health and mana, but if I had to rank stats somehow, you know, like flat health and flat mana are on the lower end. Usually getting attributes or regen, movement speed, things like that, those are usually better. Armor, magic resist, things like that. Just flat health and mana can be good, but like often not as good as other things. So what it gives you in terms of stats and the price, not amazing. It's all about this passive. And I think I say that with like every item we do, but for Aeon Disk especially, it is 100% being bought for this passive. You could probably nerf this item. Okay, well actually it's not that good already. Like it's like an okay item, so like you probably can't nerf it that much. But if the item only became a passive and you just buffed the passive, it would still fit the same role. Well, not 100%, but kind of. So before I just go on further on that, let's break down Combo Breaker. So Combo Breaker activates when you fall below 70% HP. So if you are at 100% HP, you take some spell that does 50% of your health. It activates at 70% and you're not going to take any more damage after that. If you are sitting below that, it has to be hero damage, by the way. So it has to come from an enemy hero. If you are farming Ancients as the support and they're hitting you and you fall below 70%, it's fine. The item won't activate. But if you're, say, sitting at 50% HP after farming Ancients and then Alina hits you with a stray Dragon Slave, this item will activate. You won't take any of that other damage because it activates at, say, 50% in this case. So 70% or lower, this item can activate from hero damage. You being at 70% HP, by the way. A strong dispel will be applied when it activates. And then for 2.5 seconds, you get a buff where you have 75% status resistance. And then you can't do any damage or receive any damage. But that's like the general understanding of the item, but to give it more like depth, let's start with that damage reduction. That is what's happening. All the damage you take is being multiplied by 100% damage reduction to come out as 0. So there are instances where you can still take damage. So for example, Necrophos's Heartstopper Aura, that's HP removal, and it's not affected by damage reduction. So you'll still take damage from Necrophos's passive. And there are some items and spells in this game that manipulate damage amplification. So it will change this 100% number down to, say, 90%, and then you'll take a small amount of damage. That's how I understand it. But to be honest, while trying to test it, it doesn't seem to work. And I don't know if it's a bug or if I'm misunderstanding damage manipulation. I know it works with Veil, so I do know it's possible. But I can't tell you 100% all the cases. To be honest, it doesn't really matter either. If you ever happen to die from Aeon Disk, this is why. It's because there are instances where it's possible to take damage. But usually, it's a very small amount of damage, which means when this activates at 70% of your health, which will be a lot of the times when it activates, like, you may take a little bit of damage from, like, Necrophos for, like, random spell amp stuff, but it's usually so small that you won't die. So for the most part, the item effectively keeps you alive at least for 2.5 seconds when it activates. Unless it doesn't, because there are some spells that will just kill you through Aeon Disk. For example, Axe's ultimate and Ancient Apparition's ultimate. I believe those are the two examples. I don't know if I missed one. I don't think I did. Those two work by simply killing you if you're below a certain threshold of health. It's not about damage, it just kills you. So the damage reduction doesn't matter. You simply die. But again, usually you're at like 70% HP when this activates, so you shouldn't have too much issue with those two specific heroes, but it can happen. For example, the item comes off cooldown when you happen to be at like 10% HP, and then you get hit by AA Blast. It'll activate, and then you'll die. Actually, I don't know. You might just die. I'm not 100% sure. I'll put a clip here. Let's find out. But let's say Axe, you're at 10% HP. It activates. Axe just ults you. You probably die. Unless your 10% is like 5,000 HP or something. I don't know. Obviously not 5,000. If it's above the Axe's threshold to kill. But for most supports, when you're that low, you probably will just die. So you can die. It's not perfect. But generally speaking, those are pretty niche cases. And for the most part, Aeon Disk will keep you alive when it activates. And that's kind of why we're buying it. We want to survive a kill attempt. Now, of course, any kill attempt to survive is good, but there are a couple cases where it's better than others. So, for example, if the enemy has to commit a lot to try to kill you, this could be the cooldown of a spell, like a Beastmaster Roar. Kind of a long cooldown, not too bad, but you know, you want to kill when you use that roar. And so if he uses it and then you dispel it and you live, that's kind of irritating. It may also be resources, like a Storm Spirit zipping onto you, using all his mana to get to you, and then not getting a kill. He's not going to be very happy. And if he has any mana left, he probably has to use it to escape. And, you know, it's not what he wanted to do. So he doesn't like that. And then other heroes who have to use their mobility to get to you. So like a Queen of Pain blinking to you, expecting to pick up a very free kill, and then suddenly you get dispelled. You're no longer silenced, maybe. You're now immune. Well, I'll be careful with the words I use. You're now 100% reducing damage, and you don't die, and she has no escape anymore, and now you're fighting back. She doesn't like that. So when they have to commit a lot to get to you, to try to kill you, it's really good to survive those attempts, because it usually wastes a lot of the enemy's resources or puts them in a bad position. The other time it's pretty good is when you have no time to react at all. Or maybe just very little. Maybe you're an old man and you just don't have good reaction times like me. But there are a couple cases where it's like you really have almost no reaction time. So maybe a blink hex into a shackle from a Shadow Shaman, right? It's very hard to react to that and BKB on time, or, you know, Glimmer Cape escape, force stab yourself away, blink in response, things like that. The Aeon Disk helps a lot in that regard, because you don't need to react. It's just a passive item, and it can't be muted. I'll say that now. So things like Doom, things like Disruptor Ags, it won't stop Aeon Disk from proccing. So, can't be... Well, you could be killed after 2.5 seconds, but there's a good chance you will at least live for 2.5 more seconds, and then hopefully longer after that. That's the point of the item. Other cases are like... some high burst heroes, like Lena, chain stunning you, maybe, with some other hero. She stuns you from fog, and then some other heroes follow up with chain stuns. So one, you're protected from the chain stuns due to the strong dispel, and then the follow-up stuns, you have 75% status resistance, so you're going to get stunned, but 75% status resistance is a ton, and it's very likely you'll be able to cast some kind of spell or item to help yourself survive and get away. And going with that Lena example, let's say the dispel happens. Usually she just tries to burst you all the way down and auto attack a couple times. Now, because you have this reduced damage, all of that, if she casts the spells, it's kind of just a waste. You don't take damage, so she just wasted resources. Now, of course, she may recognize that and then hold the spell after Aeon Disk procs until it fades, but that means she has to wait, which means you're getting to live a little longer. So, like, either scenario, you're kind of fulfilling what you need from here. So then, why do you need to survive the kill attempt? Of course, it's just nice to survive in general, support lives, and all that. But the most important cases are when you have some kind of spell you really need to get off. So your contribution to the team at this point is some big spell. Let's go with Global Silence, for example. In some games, that's a really big spell, and you just need to get it off, and then the fight is done. It's won for your team. Like, that's just how big the spell can be sometimes. That means all you need to do is survive and get the spell off. Dazzle Grave is another one. Oracle Ult is another one. Your job is to get off some really important spell, and because of that, the enemy team ends up prioritizing you and trying to kill you before you get to use that spell. Aeon Disk helps a ton to prevent that. They try to kill you. They try to commit a lot of resources to kill you first because they know after this guy's dead, we can kill everyone else. But Aeon Disk makes it a lot harder to do. You get your spell off, and then you can die. Who cares after that? Like, okay, kill me. I used my spell. I don't care. That's my job done. Commend me. That's why you might get it. The critical spell part. Now, this is a mid to late game item. Why? We said it's expensive and it doesn't really give you anything, so the build-up sucks. Then the cooldown being 105 seconds is a big issue. In the early to mid game, a lot of stuff's going on. A lot of small skirmishes. And so, you know, an item that's only useful every 100 seconds, not so great. And then, like, no useful stats really to help you along the way. All these small skirmishes, it's not so important. Like, of course you want them all to go in your favor, but, like, you win or you lose a couple, like, the game is still playable. When you get to the mid or late game, that's when team fights are a lot more important and a lot less common. You don't have all these small, frequent skirmishes. Every team is, like, being a little careful, being a little scared, because the game can be decided in the next good fight. And that's when, you know, you want to survive. And because after the fight goes on, like, maybe you don't win the game off one fight, but you win a fight because of the long cooldowns or the long death timers. People are dead for like 70 seconds. By the time people respawn, by the time everyone reorganizes, by the time the next team fight's going to happen, bam, combo breaker, off cooldown, ready to go again. So it's just got a lot more synergy with how the game plays in the mid to late game. Plus, that's when cores are actually strong enough to threaten to 100-0 kill you. In the early game, you gotta get hit by a couple stuns, take a lot of damage over time usually, because heroes just don't have that much damage in the early game. Usually, it does depend on the hero. But it's in the mid to late game when you've got the Desolators, the Daedalus, Divine Rapiers, these BKBs, Abyssals, where they're jumping you and killing you instantly. And that's when it's like, you know, I'd really like an item to give me like 2.5 seconds where I might get to live and possibly react instead of just getting deleted. So mid to late game item, you try to pick up other stuff first. Last thing. This cooldown is one of the weaknesses. And the stats, another weakness. This is the last big weakness. It can just be dispelled. This whole thing we talked about can simply be dispelled by a basic dispel. So when it activates, they can just dispel it off and then kill you. So the item is not dead just because of that, though. Like, but it does face some complications. That's why you don't see Aeon Disk every single game, why it's kind of niche, because it's got all these different weaknesses. Mainly this long cooldown and the fact that it can be straight up dispelled. Many carries don't have a built-in dispel, though, so depending who is the one who keeps killing you, this can still be okay. But yeah, it's a weakness you have to be aware of. Recognize that if they have dispels, the item just might not be as good, but it might still be good because, like, if they have a Oracle could dispel this, so it's like, eh. But if you think about how a fight breaks out, a lot of times the supports aren't going to be right next to each other. Well, it depends. It depends who you are. But in many cases, the supports will not be near each other. They'll be on opposite ends of the fight, with the cores usually in the middle or trying to kill the backlines. So while Oracle could dispel you, Oracle is in their own backline dealing with your cores, while you are in your backline and the enemy Storm is like zipping on you and doesn't have a dispel. So even though there's a dispel in the game, it is not near you in the team fight, potentially. It kind of depends how the team fights have been going. So I'll leave it up to you guys, but just be aware of that. It can be dispelled. And to really run home that idea that it is a mid to late game item, I want to compare it to some other defensive items here. So Ghost Scepter, Glimmer Cape, and Force Staff. Notice the difference in cooldowns. You can use these items 5 to 6 times more often than this Aeon Disk. That's why these are better in the early game. Their buildup is better. Okay, maybe not the Ghost Scepter, but these other two at least, buildup is better. Final cost, definitely cheaper. Stats and attributes, things like that, generally better. So in the early to mid game where you have all these like frequent small fights, that's when it's good. And let's say you kill someone by using this Force Staff. You get to him, you kill him. He's going to respawn in 23 seconds, but guess what? Force Staff, also very low cooldown, ready to go. Aeon Disk, like, oh, we dive the tower, I chain stun him while my carry kills him or something. Cool. He respawns. All right, Aeon Disk is still 80 seconds off, right? As if you could get 3,000 gold on the support in the early game anyways. But that's why these other items tend to be better than Aeon Disk. Aeon Disk is like a 3rd through 6th item for many games. Well, they're not fully true, but usually you try to get other things. It's like the last thing you want to have to get because it has these weaknesses like the cooldown, like the bad buildup, like the fact it can just be dispelled. Like these can be dispelled too, but like, damn, they're cheaper and you can just use them again in like a much shorter time. This is like a huge cooldown to just be removed like that, and it really sucks when that happens. So if you can get anything else to solve your problems, that is preferable. But if nothing, like you got other items and you're still having issues, that's when Aeon Disk can help because of the passive that activates, and because it does give you health. So I was like flaming the stats a little bit, but 300 health, pretty sizable. It does make you a little bit harder to kill, especially with any armor and magic resist you might already have, say from some earlier items. So you do just become tankier, as well as have this activating passive to save you a bit. There's also one high-level trick you guys might want to be aware of for Aeon Disk. I don't fully recommend this to new players or even most players. Like, this is kind of a niche, high-skill thing to do, and it does have its risks. So don't feel like you need to do this, but you might see some pro players do this, and it's something you're free to try. But let's say what we mentioned, like you want the enemy to have to commit, and you don't want this thing to just proc randomly, especially if you know you're going to survive. So for example, I'm here sitting at 81 health, and let's say Elsie just pokes at me, she uses a spell, my Aeon Disk procs, and now it's down for 105 seconds. But that overwhelming odds was not going to kill me, right? I didn't, like, maybe I was in the high ground defending base and they just threw some spells and it activates Aeon Disk. And that's pretty unfortunate. Like, I didn't really want it to go off, and now it's down for a long time. So what you can do the very first time, actually I can't even use this one. What you can do the very first time you get your Aeon Disk, before you complete the item, leave one component locked. The other parts will probably be in your backpack. They don't strictly have to be, but at least one component needs to be in your inventory, and then 2 of the components have to be unlocked, 1 has to be locked. Any of them can be the one that's locked. So it doesn't, like, I'm just using this one just because it's not like specific to this vitality booster. But this way, when they're like throwing out random spells, I won't lose the Aeon Disk, right? And I know, I was gonna live anyways, it's fine. But when I do think I'm about to die, and this Legion is gonna come and duel me, right? I can quickly unlock this item and hope to survive. I'm not gonna survive in this case, it looks like, but you see how I have more control. Your pub games usually won't have an LC with so many shards and a Deso hitting you. But by unlocking your last component, the item will instantly finish in your inventory, and then you're good to go. But you can only do it once. So like once Aeon Disk has activated, and once you assemble it and leave it for a little bit, you lose the ability to disassemble it. And so now you don't have a choice. And now you're just playing with the Aeon Disk in your inventory. Which brings us to a second, more minor, even riskier trick. You could backpack it. It won't activate in your backpack. The downside being that there's a 6-second cooldown when you take it from your backpack to your inventory. So the reason that last trick to work is because if you have the reaction times and you have the mechanics, when you see them about to kill you, you can quickly come and unlock it, instantly finishes. In this case, if it's sitting here and then she comes to duel me, I'm dead, right? Because by the time this thing comes off cooldown to activate, I'm gone. So it's risky. Now, if you're just like moving around the map, nothing important's happening, but you are getting hit by random spells, like let's say you're playing around the map, you're a little low, but you know they have like a Furion or a Zeus who might just hit you with a random global ult. They're not even trying to fight your team right now. They're just like a scouting ult, and it activates Aeon Disk, and that sucks. So you could keep it in your backpack, and then if Zeus happens to ult, you'll lose a bit of health, but Aeon Disk won't proc. And later, when you guys are ready to siege high ground or defend high ground or a team fight, whatever, then you bring it into your inventory a little bit ahead of time so it's ready to go. But now if it activates, you're like kind of okay with it because you're in a team fight. Now, another way you could kind of mitigate the risk, so if you wait to see them come in and then you put it in, it's 6 seconds. But if you keep swapping it out, right? If they start a fight now, it's actually only 4 seconds or like 2 seconds. And then, no, I don't need it yet. I'll do it again. So now, guaranteed, instead of the 6 seconds times I have to wait for it to be useful, it's now less than 6 seconds. When? I don't know. It kind of depends when the fight breaks out. But you see it's like, oh, if a fight happens now, it's only 4 seconds till Aeon Disk's active. So you could just keep swapping it out like this. Similar to like Tranquil Boots, if you've ever farmed with Tranquil Boots and you don't want to drop them on the ground, but you don't want them to break to getting hit by creeps, you kind of backpack and swap it in, and if you're not about to finish the camp yet, you kind of do it again. It's kind of like that. Again, very risky to do. I really don't recommend this to most players, but it feels like I have to mention it if we're doing an Aeon Disk video. Like these little like tips and tricks you can do with it. This should have been like a +1 MMR thing maybe. But whatever. Maybe it still will be, guys. If you see that video come up, I ran out of ideas and I needed a short video. Oh, and to show you guys the interaction, so like Nullifier is fortunately not that common of an item. So Aeon Disk will still be useful against many carries, but if they have Nullifier, they can't just use it on you ahead of time because Aeon Disk will actually dispel the Nullifier. But if they wait for Aeon Disk to proc and then use Nullifier, they'll remove the Aeon Disk. So boom, like so. I should have been essentially immune during that time, but she just dispels the item off of me and then kills me. Alright, let's do the hero breakdown like usual. So let's start with some heroes where you might see Aeon Disk purchased. I will say, actually, before even getting into it, any hero could buy this item. Any support could buy this item. It is useful for everyone in certain games where they're just getting straight up deleted. But these heroes that I'm highlighting here, I think just fit the description of what a good Aeon Disk game is the most. And so I think these are heroes you should think the most often about buying Aeon Disk. But again, anyone can buy it. You could buy it on a Lion and then like survive, hex, stun, ult, things like that, and it's fine. But to now get back to the original point, let's start with Ancient Apparition. Ice Blast is a massive spell in certain games. In general, it's pretty good. But against heroes like Morphling, Alchemist, Huskar, your job is to actually just hit those heroes with your ultimate. And that's it. Well, that's actually it. That's all you need to do. If you hit them with your ultimate, it's like, okay, I've contributed. That's it. Slight exaggeration, but also not. Like, it is so important to hit this ult. And that's what the Aeon Disk is for. Because Morphling knows how difficult it is to play the game when AA is there, he's like, guys, someone on my team, please just kill the AA. Maybe he'll try. He will come in, E-Blade, W, try to burst you down, but not anymore. Not with this Aeon Disk. You are guaranteed to get a chance to shoot off your ultimate. Especially, so technically it's a global ability. You could stand really far back and then use your ult. You'd be very safe there, but it's kind of hard to hit your ult there. And then I was joking, like, you can do other things in the fight if you're there. So if you're close enough, though, you do become a little bit at risk, and that's where the Aeon Disk helps. You're close, someone jumps you, but then you're so close, you're going to get the Ancient Apparition ult. You don't have to channel a long time because you're really close for the fight. So it's good for that. Plus, you're a fragile hero, so just like the health in general is nice. Omni Knight with his everything, actually. Mainly his Guardian Angel, but also the Heavenly Grace, Purification. They're all great saving spells. And in fact, we can jump forward. Dazzle with the Grave, and Oracle with False Promise, and even Fate's Edict, Fortune's End, like the Purifying Flames. All these spells designed to save teammates. And when you need to save them, you kind of need to save them. So you have to be near the fight, and you have to be ready to cast your spells, but because you can save teammates, that ends up putting a big target on your head, and the enemy team often tries to kill these heroes first. So the Aeon Disk guarantees that you'll get to cast at least some of your spells when it activates. The Strong Dispel goes off. The status resistance prevents you from mostly, for the most part, getting chain stunned, and then the damage reduction, you're going to get your spells off. Your damage doesn't really matter. For all these heroes, you'll notice, the damage of the spells is not a huge part of it. It is part of it, but the spells, like AA's ult, it lasts long enough that for that small time, you're not doing damage, whatever. After that, then it will start doing damage, but it's the effects of the spells, because they're either heals or like the shatter threshold, the healing reduction prevention. It doesn't matter that it's not doing damage. Those are the important parts. Silencer, it doesn't matter. His ult doesn't even do damage anyways. So like, who cares? You're all about getting this global silence off. I will say Silencer is generally a hero who can position in a way to not need Aeon Disk. Because it's called global silence, you can stand anywhere and use this ability. You can even stand in the fountain if you need to guarantee you're alive, and then you ult. But sometimes it's still hard, like say there's a Spectre in the game, or obviously you don't want to be in the fountain. You want to be a little closer to the fight. So the Aeon Disk can help guarantee that I'm going to get the ult off. Of course, you may be forced to use it then, like, oh, they're killing me, I kind of have to like ult now or else I die. Whereas maybe other items could help you stay further back, stay in the fight, and get to choose when to use your ultimate a bit more. But I still think he can be a potential Aeon Disk carrier. Kind of depends on the game a bit. Warlock, again, your damage, maybe the damage is going to get blocked from the initial Fatal Bonds ult combo. But what matters is that you cast these spells, and Fatal Bonds will split the damage. Funny enough, if you're affected by Aeon Disk, I thought it wouldn't matter. Fatal Bonds won't split the damage. But afterwards, when the effect ends, you'll do the shared damage, even if you die, and that's great. And the Chaotic Offering, of course, you stun them for a bit, and now your golems will do damage. Plus, you can channel Upheaval, and this is a good time to say it. The activation of Aeon Disk does not cancel channels. So you're standing there casting this Upheaval. Some enemy heroes find it annoying. They try to jump you and kill you. Doesn't actually stop you from channeling for at least another 2.5 seconds. So it's kind of nice on other channeling heroes too. But for Warlock, it's mainly about the Fatal Bonds plus ult combo, and then the Upheaval's kind of nifty, a nifty interaction too. Speaking of big channeled ultimates, Enigma. So, still an uncommon item. You usually buy other things first, but at the end of the day, if you think about it, a lot of Enigma's items tend to be about being able to get a good black hole off full duration. The BKB, the Lincolns, Blinks, things like that. Like, a huge part of this hero is being able to use black hole, and not getting killed is one of those things. So sometimes Aeon Disk helps to guarantee that you survive long enough to then be able to cast your ult, especially like on support Enigma a bit. Core Enigma still tend to go for like bigger items instead. But at least on a support, especially if they're jumping you, the Aeon Disk is helpful because they try to kill you. They try to stun you, for example, you dispel it off, and then you black hole them right in front of their face. The damage is removed, of course, that's unfortunate, but I mean, a BKB AoE piercing stun, pretty good. And it won't cancel the channel. So sometimes even with your items, you just get killed by like a Clinks hitting you outside of black hole, and it's unfortunate. But the Aeon Disk kind of guarantees you get 2.5 seconds of channel. So it's kind of nice. But again, uncommon on Enigma and like maybe Silencer. Some of these other supports I think are a little more common. And again, we could add other supports in there. Like, it's not bad on any supports, strictly speaking. I just usually think there's better items and like they have more flexibility. Aeon Disk is like this one-sided, I get jumped and I die. I need to solve that. Nothing else solves that. All right, Aeon Disk. And you hope they don't have dispels. And if they do, you have to go for something else. And next, let's talk about heroes that you can buy Aeon Disk against. Enigma, Black Hole, 4-second duration. So, assuming it doesn't proc immediately, you take a bit of damage, maybe like 1 second, and then Aeon Disk procs, you're likely to survive the rest of Black Hole, which guarantees you get to cast a spell afterwards. Hopefully several. Hopefully you escape alive. But it really helps to prevent you from just getting killed immediately. The strong Dispel won't matter so much against Black Hole or Chronosphere in this case, but it's the damage reduction that really comes into play here. Faceless Void. Chronosphere, very similar idea. He wants to get some kills in this, and if you can waste some of his time, like maybe he still kills you. This is long enough. Chronosphere is long enough to just kill you afterwards. But if you waste 2.5 seconds of his time, that's a bit irritating for him, especially if he has BKB going. You know, he has to switch targets because Aeon Disk procs. He has to go somewhere else, kill that guy, then come back to you. Anytime you're wasting carry's time, it's nice. And so this is one of the few counterplays too, because you don't have to activate the item against these heroes. It's very nice. Like Glimmer, Force, things like that you can usually use to save yourself or teammates. You don't get to when you're in these spells. So the Aeon Disk can at least save yourself for a bit in the duration of these spells. What am I saying? Okay, next, Magnus, another big ult. Actually, I don't have to say that much about it. Magnus, the big ult. I will, though. The big ult, and then like the chain stuns into skewer, the enemy teams comboing spells. Aeon Disk, fantastic. Keeps you alive, then the status resistance prevents you from getting chain stunned. Earthshaker, very similar. You won't get deleted in an echo when you're all next to each other because the damage will stop at 70%, and then you can't get chain stunned thanks to the status resistance. Tidehunter, very similar. Big teamfight ultimate, dispelled right off if, well, it depends. Maybe you don't take enough damage to get the dispel off. But if that happens, you're also not dying, so your Aeon Disk is actually still off cooldown, which is kind of good. So it's like, you know, if I get ravaged and the Aeon Disk goes off, great. I can now fight and maybe save my team from the ravage. And if it doesn't go off, well, then I'm alive after ravage. Nice. Wyvern ult, especially when she gets blinked, she just tries to like delete a hero. And usually it's kind of hard to kill cores. So she likes to ult a support, and then the cores kill the poor support. Aeon Disk, usually going to get you out alive, but maybe not. We'll see. But it's at least something to give you a fighting chance. Beastmaster, the Roar, it's annoying if you use it and then the enemy just gets away. So that's kind of a pain. It's not a huge cooldown, you know, 70 seconds at level 3, but still, when you roar, you want to kill someone. So the Aeon Disk being able to save them a bit is not what Beastmaster wants to deal with. Bane, if you've been getting gripped for whatever reason, usually Fiend's Grip is safe for carries with BKB, stuff like that. But if he's been using it on you as a support, the Aeon Disk is nice because you will dispel the grip if he uses it before. If he uses it after, then, well, one, you have the status resistance, but if he waits for the effects to totally fade and then uses it, you know, that sucks. We're back to the original square one. That's kind of why, like, other items might be a little better if you can afford them, like the Lotus Orb or Lincoln's, but those are more expensive, harder to get to, so, you know, we kind of have to get to what we can get. And if you use those defensively to protect your team, you can't protect yourself. Plus, you need the reaction times, kind of going back to the whole idea that this item is just passive. Duel, if Duel is used on you, Aeon Disk will proc, it'll probably keep you alive. But the full duration Duel will go off. If she uses Duel after it goes off, you'll have a really short Duel. So otherwise, she just has to wait. Kind of the same I just said with Bane, and that it's just generally makes your life easier, makes the enemy's life harder. Even if there's ways to play around Aeon Disk, it's like extra hassle the enemy has to deal with. PA, just someone who can just delete supports. Abyssal, get a crit, you don't get to play. if you get blinked on Abyssal, like there's no playing, there's no reacting. So the Aeon Disk, the passive to save you. Same with Ursa, same with Sven. They just kind of get on top of you. Abyssal, or maybe just a crit ult, or sorry, a stun ult. Huge crit, just deleted from the game, but not with the Aeon Disk. Storm Spirit, we mentioned him. He zips onto you, uses a lot of resources. Very annoying. You can't really target him while he's zipping, so if he hexes you or silences you, then you're dead, unless you have some counterplay, Aeon Disk potentially being one of them in the late game. Morphling, mentioned him too. Same deal. Clinks pops out of Invis, maybe Orchid, maybe Hex, maybe just kills you. You know, so if you get to Ghost Scepter, cool, but if he hexes you, you don't get a Ghost Scepter. Aeon Disk will give you a chance to Ghost Scepter after that, kind of keep you alive a little longer. Shadow Fiend. This Arcane Blink into Abyssal build is getting a little bit more common, and it just deletes people. Deletes them. So having this Aeon Disk to stop the damage at 70% is kind of nice. Lena, same deal, kind of with Shadow Fiend and Lion, where the burst damage can just delete heroes, but not with the Aeon Disk. Of course, you can buy like Glimmer Cape, some other items, but usually, like, that's why I said Aeon Disk is like later. You know, it's like adding on to all this stuff. You got the magic resist from Glimmer, now you're adding on the health from the Aeon Disk, plus the active is kind of nice. So then when's it not so good? Not saying you can't build it against these heroes, but there's counterplay, and it's not so nice. So Doom. The whole point of Doom is to prevent you from casting spells and items. Aeon Disk might keep you alive a little longer, but it can't dispel Doom. So you still can't cast spells. Your Aeon Disk will go off. Like, the item's not muted. We mentioned that earlier. But, like, you just can't cast anything. And as long as Doom is cast before the Aeon Disk goes off, the full duration affects you. It's not affected by the 75% resistance. If he happens to cast it on you in those 2.5 seconds when Aeon Disk is active, then Doom is greatly reduced, the time. But Dooms could just not cast it on you in that time and pretty much complete their goal of preventing you. Let's say you're a Silencer, Oracle, Dazzle. You just can't cast spells for as long as Doom's going. So Aeon Disk is not what you need against him. Usually you want like a Linken's or a Lotus. Again, very expensive items for a support. The Lotus doesn't offer the greatest response. Like, the Linken's is kind of what you need, and that's like expensive. Aeon Disk also not really what you need against Doom, as it so happens. Night Stalker, Disruptor, Riki, what do they have in common? This AoE silence. So if you're hoping the Dispel from Aeon Disk will give you a chance to cast spells, well, not if there's a silence going on. And then you won't, unless you have like a BKB or another item to then get you out of the silence and cast a spell. So Aeon Disk might provide that opportunity that you don't just get like bashed into a silence, into a kill. Like, the Aeon Disk proc might remove the stun so you can Force Staff out and then cast something. But you kind of see that's why, like, Aeon Disk alone will not be enough. That's why you buy it later. You've got these other items to work with. It's also kind of jumping ahead. The dispels at the end, that's one of the counterplays to that. You know, they can't dispel everything, I hope, right? So if you have the Aeon Disk and they dispel that, then you Ghost Scepter. And they're like, ah, shit, I just used my Dispel. Now he's Ghost Sceptered for a bit. Or maybe you Glimmer after that. Or maybe they dispelled the Glimmer and then your Aeon Disk procs. And he's like, haha, a second solution. So that's like why Aeon Disk first item really kind of bad. But if you get it later, you can kind of mitigate the fact that it can just be dispelled. It still sucks, but it's mitigated a bit because the enemy team probably doesn't have infinite dispels. Going back to where we were, Huskar, it'll keep you alive a little longer, but the way Huskar works, he's a damage over time hero. So he ults you, he hits you with a ton of burning spears. Oh, look at me, I'm invincible for 2.5 seconds. Not really invincible, but you guys know. And then it ends, and then you just burn to death because there's like 50 burning spears on you. So it doesn't really keep you alive from Huskar. Other items are generally better for that. Slark, I would actually rather just die. Slark is so happy to keep stealing agility stacks from you as a support. He's like, I am not being threatened at all. Obviously, there could be cases where he is, but in general, he's very happy to hit a support who won't die, and he just gets to steal a ton of agility stacks. So maybe don't buy it against Slark. Again, if you have some other items to combo with it, then like it can work out a bit for you, but you're still stuck by Pounce. Like, you can't get out of that. You can't dispel that. And then he's just stealing stacks, and not so great. Anti-Mage kind of fits this like hero who has to blink in on you, but then he can just burn off your mana. So he won't do any damage, but your mana gets burned off. And so if you're a support hoping to get a spell off, but then he just keeps hitting you and all your mana's gone, then it's like, what's the point? Now, these I kind of already mentioned, if they have a Dispel. So Shadow Demons is the most worrisome. Because it's persisting, Shadow Demon's ults cannot be removed by Dispels, which means all the other Dispels had to wait for Aeon Disk to proc, and then they could use the Dispel. But Shadow Demon, he can just throw it on you, and then if Aeon Disk goes off, it's just instantly removed. Having said that, Shadow Demon probably doesn't really want to ult a support Silencer, a support Warlock. He probably wants to use it on a core. So, even though it is this counterplay mechanic, probably not going to be used on you unless he buys an Aghanim's with like the charges. But that's a pretty expensive item for a support Shadow Demon. So if he gets that, then like Aeon Disk might not be so good because he's like happy to use one on you to get the kill on you. But otherwise, you know, some might say if he has to ult you instead of your core, that might actually be a win. So maybe the Aeon Disk is actually baiting him. Sven's Dispel got removed from his stun to the shard, and Sven in general right now is really bad. I kind of feel like he's almost too bad. I don't miss it because he was a huge pain, but I do think he'll be buffed again eventually, and then maybe it'll be like changing this shard back to a talent. Like maybe they'll buff something else. I don't know. But if Sven has a Dispel, it is a little scary because he can just remove the Aeon Disk. Then, having said that, usually the way Sven kills supports is that he ults, he stuns, and then he deletes them. What that means is that he's stunning first, and then Aeon Disk will proc after that. And since the stun is the Dispel, you know, this is kind of low cooldown, but not so low that he can stun to you and then stun immediately again after Aeon Disk goes off, unless he's with like a Keyboard Light or something. That's different. But that usually means you'll at least get to cast something else like a Ghost Scepter, or, well, maybe not a Ghost Scepter because he'll just dispel it when he gets it. But like maybe you force away, maybe you stun him, something like that. So Aeon Disk still has its use against Sven, but he is, you know, PA doesn't really have a built-in Dispel unless she buys Nullifier, whereas he kind of has a much cheaper shard option. And if he gets good again, keep an eye on that. Troll right now is good. This Ag's really irritating, reduces the cooldown, and gives a Dispel to the ranged axes, so that includes Aeon Disk. So he can hit you, proc the Aeon, and then just Dispel it off. It's really low cooldown, so he can use it to initiate, run up to you, hit you, proc it, and then use it to Dispel. So I said Sven can't do it. Troll pretty much can, and that's kind of a hassle. So go for other items like a Yule's to control this guy. Enchantress, Dispel on Enchant. She's a support though, so again, kind of think about how fights are breaking out. Is she near you? Are you like a really backline support? Like, does that mean like she's gonna be next to you? Kind of unlikely. Maybe depending how the fight breaks out, she might be there. But in other cases, if you're just worried about the storms, the PAs jumping you, and Enchantress is like somewhere else in the fight, you know, maybe you don't have to worry about it. Same with Oracle's Q. Also a Dispel, but usually in a different part of the fight. Not always, but usually. I know there are a couple other heroes with Dispels, so just add them in if you want. I didn't really want to throw every single one in here. I felt these were the most common. Necrobook has a Dispel on it, but still, same idea. You get the Necro dispelled, or you get the Aeon Disk effect dispelled, then you pop the Ghost Scepter, something like that. Sometimes you just need to have multiple save options, and that's why Aeon Disk is like towards the end. Get your other save options when they become not enough. Aeon Disk is like another save option. May not save you in the end, but at least they have to work for it. So those are the heroes I want to highlight. That's it. I got nothing else to say. This is already a lot, I think. Maybe not. I think it was just about a usual itemization video. All right, thanks for watching, guys. As always, feel free to leave questions. Aeon Disk, nifty item, really good in some circumstances, not that common. So honestly, if you felt like, wow, I haven't been buying Aeon Disk that often, neither do I, so don't feel too bad. But I don't really play any of these heroes that much, so maybe that's why. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.